Well, we're continuing today as we look at this topic of remaining and abiding with Christ. You know, it's such a powerful teaching that Jesus gives there near the very end of his life. The Common English Bible words it this way: "Remain in me, and I will remain in you. A branch can't produce fruit by itself, but must remain in the vine. Likewise, you can't produce fruit unless you remain in me. I am the vine, and you are the branches. If you remain in me, and I in you, you will produce much fruit. Without me, you can't do anything." It begins with Jesus. We must stay with him. C.S. Lewis wrote, "If you want to get warm, you must stand near the fire. If you want to get wet, you must get in the water. If you want joy, power, peace, eternal life, you must get close to or even into the thing or person that has them." So if that's what we're searching for in life, C.S. Lewis points out so well, we must remain with him. Remain in Jesus for peace, for joy, for fulfillment. The list could go on. Last week, as we started, I told you we'd be spending about 2 weeks looking at the topic of fulfillment and satisfaction. And we looked at the story of the woman at the well. Her life is such a great picture and a great story and a great example of someone trying to find fulfillment, searching for it in whatever way she can. And in her case, it would have been relationships. And she tried over and over, looking at anything but Jesus. It won't last. It doesn't last. For apart from Jesus, it won't work. Today, as we continue looking at that term, satisfaction, is you understand it's something we look for so often. Even those who've decided to follow Jesus, we're still looking for that satisfaction. We had the opportunity earlier this month to go on vacation to Maine, and this topic, fulfillment, had been on my mind because I knew that's what I was going to preach on when I got back. And one morning while I was there, I was reading my Bible in this beautiful sunroom, and I was reading the feeding of the multitude in the book of Matthew, the feeding of the 4,000. And what jumped out to me is in this feeding a very simple statement: they all ate and were satisfied. You know, it's so interesting when you really think about it, is there's two feedings that we read of in the Gospels. Feeding of the 5,000, which is in every single gospel. It's the only miracle, save for the resurrection, that you will find in every single gospel. Then you have the feeding of the 4,000 found in Matthew and Mark. So, just me doing with my Turner education, 4 plus 2, that's 6. 6 times we read of Jesus feeding thousands of people with just a little. And they all ate and they were satisfied. There's something to be seen about that. That Jesus wanted to make sure that it was in... I just see all the kids running upstairs. This is great. We see that in the Gospels so often. There's so much for us to glean from that. So that's what we're going to be looking at today. The feeding of the 4,000 found in Matthew 15. Now as we get into that, understand Jesus has been healing people day after day after day. And it says, "Look, I have compassion on the crowd," verse 32, "because they've been with me now 3 days, and they have nothing to eat. I'm unwilling to send them away hungry, lest they faint on the way." 2 statements, 2 words jump out there. You see the compassion of Jesus. It's this compassion that Jesus has for thousands of people. One writer stated, "The compassion of Jesus is the most common emotional state ascribed to him." The compassion of Jesus is the most common emotional state that we find ascribed to Jesus. He displayed compassion to the woman at the well, as we looked at last week, and here he has compassion on and for the crowd. Compassion means more than just feeling sorry for. I just want to remind us of what that means. Compassion means to be deeply aware of the suffering of another person, coupled with the desire to help him or her. It's more than just feeling sorry, but it's feeling sorry and you want to do something about it. See, Jesus was concerned about the crowd, and I want to tell you this, he's concerned about you. I love that when I read that in the Gospels. He's concerned about the thousands, and he's concerned about the individual. In other words, he's always concerned about you. He sees you in the good times, he sees you in the bad, and he wants what's best for you. He has a compassionate heart towards us. You know, even in the book of Exodus, this is just a telling statement. The Israelites had been in bondage for year after year after year. It says in Exodus 2, the king of Egypt died, but the Israelites continued to groan under their burden of slavery. They cried out for help, and their cry rose up to God. God heard their groaning, and he remembered his covenant promise to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Verse 25, he looked down on the people and knew it was time to act. See, that's what compassion does. It doesn't just hear the news, but it knows it's time to act. And you see this compassion, and there's another statement that jumps out to me in just verse 32. It says he was unwilling. He was unwilling to send the crowd away hungry. He knows their needs just as he knows our needs. That's never changed with Jesus. And he's unwilling to want us or even allow us to remain in the same state, whatever that may be. He's unwilling for us to remain in that dissatisfaction we may find ourselves in. You see, Jesus knows this crowd is running on empty. They've been with him 3 days. He knows they have nothing left. He knows they're running on fumes. And can you imagine being a parent with kids that have no food? Can you imagine that? Wouldn't that be fun? And maybe that's you this morning. Maybe you feel like you're running on empty, that you have nothing left in the tank. You're struggling to keep moving forward, to even remain with Jesus at this point. And sometimes we have that feeling. We've allowed the dissatisfaction to creep in so deeply, and we just don't quite know what to do. What's really interesting about this story is as you continue, as you recall, I'll let you know, the feeding of the 5,000 has already occurred. They didn't have much then, they didn't have much now. And the disciples simply look to Jesus and remind him, where are we going to get enough bread in such a desolate place to feed such a great crowd? Basically, they're looking at Jesus and saying, what are you going to do about this? What strikes me about the miracles of the feedings is nowhere do we read that the crowd was grumbling or complaining. Nowhere do we read that. If anything, when I read it, it's the disciples who are distraught because they have such little amounts of food to feed this thousands of people. And Jesus simply looks at them in verse 34 and says, how much bread do you have? They replied, 7 loaves and a few small fish. You know, I always like the situations that we read in the Bible where we don't have a lot, or there's not much that we have. Yet when we surrender that to God, how he is able to do so much. I'm always reminded of Moses. All he has is this rod, and he uses that rod to part a Red Sea. I'm reminded of the story of Gideon, who God says you have too many, and he pares this army down to just a few hundred people, and God is able to deliver the Israelites. It amazes me. We think we don't have enough, but God is able to take the little that we do have and work wonders. So now, again, the feeding of the 5,000 has already occurred, but it doesn't seem the disciples have even remembered this. I found it so true that we seem so quick to forget God's goodness towards us in the past when confronted with the difficulty today. Have you ever been there? We always forget what God has done, the answered prayers we've had when we're confronted with the difficulty this Sunday or Monday. We forget. But I read this story and I continually see how God can use what we have if we give it to him. Verse 35, Jesus told all the people to sit down. He took the 7 loaves, thanked God, broke them, gave them, who distributed the food to the crowd. Those that remained ate. Those that stayed would receive all that they needed. You know, it would have been so easy if you were part of the crowd to get out of there. Crowd, if I would have been in that crowd, I would have known I was out of food. I would have known that. But if you stayed, you ate. You see, Jesus was healing. There was ministry going on. And it just is like a truism of a statement Jesus made. Seek first His kingdom, and all this will be added. Verse 37. I go back to the linchpin verse. They all ate and were satisfied. Again, every time you read the story of the miracle of the feedings, there's 6 instances. And all but one, it literally says, they were satisfied. They were filled. They were full. It means to fatten, to supply in abundance. And I'm going to dive in a little deeper on that word. And please understand, I'm not comparing you to animals because that's where the word comes from. The word was used for the feeding of animals until the animal wanted nothing more. The animals would be allowed to stay at the feeding trough. You're not at a feeding trough. Until they were completely satisfied. It's literally a picture of animals staying until they wanted nothing more to eat. It literally means they were provided for enough to satisfy. And Jesus uses this word figuratively to refer to experiencing an inward satisfaction, being content with an object or being content with the state that you're in. This is what the people felt. They were satisfied. They were doing what Jesus said. They sat down. The disciples gave what little they had, and God was able to use that, and all were satisfied. It's like Paul says, I know and have learned how to be satisfied and content no matter what state I'm in. Afterwards, the disciples picked up 7 large baskets of leftover food. You see, the crowd didn't have just enough to get by. Jesus didn't provide just a little bit to get them on the road. What's Quick Trip call that? A snackle, getting a little snack? He didn't give them just enough to get to the nearest town to get their own food. The crowd was satisfied completely with what Jesus provided. The one simple question I have today is, what are we hungry for? Maybe that's the issue. We are hungry and thirsty for the wrong things in life. You know, Jesus speaks to this in one of His most powerful teachings. If you've ever read the Sermon on the Mount and the Beatitudes, you understand that Jesus was literally changing everything around. Everything changed with that little sermon. And He says in Matthew 5:6, I'm going to read the English Standard Version. He said, "Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied." They shall be. When you hunger and thirst for righteousness, you'll be satisfied. Jesus uses such an incredible illustration there. The people of the day that He was speaking to would have completely been familiar with hunger, more so than we are today. But we're all familiar with hunger. You're probably hungry right now. We don't like it. We're born with an innate need of hunger and food. Babies cry when they're hungry. As adults, we don't cry. They've created a new word for that. We get hangry. Anybody ever been hangry? You know, it's funny. I didn't realize it. It's actually in the dictionary, hangry. It means to be irritable or angry because of hunger. And I have felt that. I don't feel it yet. But anyway, we get hungry. See, Jesus knows that we will do our best to satisfy that hunger, to satisfy that need of food and drink, because we all ultimately hunger for satisfaction in life. We're all on this quest. The question is, where are we looking to find that satisfaction? What are we hungering after? It won't be satisfied in money. It won't be satisfied in relationships. It won't be satisfied in revenge. You're like, revenge? I've seen people consumed with revenge. Have you? Not a pretty picture. It won't be satisfied in popularity, but in righteousness. You see, whatever you think will satisfy you will become the consuming passion of your life. What drives us? Peter writes, Jesus bore our sins that we might die to sin and live to righteousness. It's a state of being and how we should be. It should be driving us forward. It should be our passion, this desire for righteousness. Again, hunger, after all, is a sign of health. Your body has a need. But you know, your spirit has a need also. And it won't be satisfied until it's going after righteousness. One writer put it so well. Christ died to redeem a people who no longer live for themselves, but who live with a passion for holiness. You won't be satisfied unless you thirst and go after Him. You see, what happens is we have this tendency to go after the fake stuff. We all like fake stuff. We begin searching for an artificial filler. Isaiah writes about it. He goes, "Why do you spend your money for that which is not bread, your labor for that which does not satisfy?" And we waste this time going after that which doesn't really satisfy. It's like junk food. We get hungry, and instead of making a meal that we know will be nourishing, we hit Wendy's or McDonald's or Chick-fil-A or Culver's. They fill us up, but there's no nutritional value. And let's just be honest, I really like it, don't we? But it doesn't mean it's good for you. You're hungry, your hunger is filled, but it's an artificial filling, and we think we're okay. You know, we had the opportunity, as I said earlier, to go to Maine, and we were staying in a home that wasn't 5 minutes away from a literal shop on the inlet there, where they just had fresh lobsters. They had just got them that morning. They were that fresh. And so we got real lobster. Not artificial, but 100% real lobster. I will tell you this, my wife does not like lobster, doesn't like seafood, period. I don't mind lobster at all. And so we were going to get lobster, and we did. I got two to eat for me. And Robin said, okay, maybe I'll try it. It was until we sat down to eat. And have you ever had your own lobster? And so our host showed us how to do that. And you just crack the lobster. Well, everything that came out of that lobster, Robin was like, I will not touch that for $1 million. And if you've ever done that, you know what I'm talking about. It's nasty. I still ate it. Don't know why. Later on, I'm going, why do people eat lobster? It's a mess. I've had lobster tail, but you know what? It was on a cruise, and they brought the lobster tail with me. Nice and sanitary and perfect. I like it that. I still ate it, but the point is, it was real lobster. And they have imitation lobster meat. And what's really interesting about imitation lobster meat is most of it has some real lobster mixed in with it. It's just enough mixed in to make you think it's really a lobster. They'll add red food dye, they'll shape it, and voila, you have your lobster tail. It's deceptive. You see, what the enemy says will satisfy you does not last. It's very deceptive. It may look good. It may smell good. It may look like the real deal. But if you're not hungering and thirsting after what Jesus says and what Jesus wants, after righteousness, it will not last. Are we settling for the artificial? It's a lot easier to settle for the artificial. When I go to Culver's, I don't have to do any dishes. It's a lot easier. When I get a fake lobster, it's a lot easier because it was a hot mess. You have to shower after you're done. I just felt like I was a mess. But I'm telling you, it's worth it. And many of us settle for that which is artificial, that which is deceptive. You see, Jesus wants and longs for you to be satisfied. He wants you to be. It's what He wants. It's what the Good Shepherd wants in your life. You see, the Good Shepherd knows more and sees more than us sheep. Listen to the first two words of Psalm 23. It says, "The Lord is my shepherd," David writes. "I shall not want." It's my shepherd. He makes me lie down in green pastures, and He leads me beside still waters. And I've been reading that for the past week. That part, He makes me. He makes me. The verbs that are used there, it's an open-ended, continual action. He makes us lie down in green pastures. And the idea is that the shepherd is constantly and consistently leading the sheep to places of nourishment, substance, and health. It's ongoing. He knows what's going on in your life. He knows your needs. He knows your desires. He put them there after all. We need to seek Him. He makes me. I remember when it's funny that I can remember this. I was 5 years old. I am now 50-something years old, and so I still can remember this. It's over 45 years ago. We lived at a little duplex right there on 35. If you see Antioch Family Church, it was right behind there. We lived on a duplex. We had a next-door neighbor. young boy, maybe a year older than me. And he came over one day with a cup of Kool-Aid and his little red mustache. I literally can picture this. And he looked at me, and first off, disclaimer, for those of you who don't know, I don't drink after anybody. It doesn't matter who it is. It could be a family member. I just don't do that. And maybe it started with this. I have a feeling when I was doing this, I was having to come to Jesus. Anyway, 5 years old, he comes over, a cup of Kool-Aid, and he goes, "Chris, have some Kool-Aid." And I said, "No, I don't want any Kool-Aid." And I'll never forget, he looked at me and he goes, "Have some Kool-Aid." So I had some Kool-Aid. He makes me. He makes me. He makes me. He makes me lie down. Quit kicking against God. He makes me lie down. The shepherd knows what's best for you. He makes me lie down. He makes me. The artificial isn't going to cut it. The artificial isn't going to work. It may look good, but I just keep picturing that little 5-year-old, "Have some Kool-Aid." I feel like God is telling some of us, "Lie down!" And we're like, "Nah, I'm good." Let him lead you. Let him lead you. That's the only way you'll find true satisfaction. Do as he asks. Give what you have. Keep seeking, and you will be satisfied. You see, when Jesus provides, he gives more than we could ever expect. We come to him for forgiveness, and we expect him to clean the slate, but he does more than that. He gives us a slate full of his righteousness, perfect righteousness. When we come to him for peace, we think, "Oh, God will help me get rid of this anxious thought." He does more than that. He gives us a peace that surpasses all understanding. That's what Jesus does. When we come to him for strength, we expect God to give us some kind of pick-me-up, but he does more than that. He gives us abundantly more than we might ask, think, or imagine. That is what the Good Shepherd does. Don't fight against it. Do as he asks you. Give what you have. Keep seeking. What are we hungry for? What are we starving for? You may be saved. You're here on a brutally cold Sunday morning. And oftentimes we think that's where our hunger and desires. Don't let it stop. We need to keep thirsting and hungering for him. Don't let it stop. That's the only way we'll find true satisfaction. As we close today, I want to share this quote, another quote, a lot of C.S. Lewis today. C.S. Lewis writes, "We are half-hearted creatures, fooling around with drink and ambition when infinite joy is offered us. Like an ignorant child who wants to go on making mud pies in a slum because he cannot imagine what is meant by the offer of a holiday at the sea, we are far too easily pleased." We're way too pleased with the artificial. And that's where our satisfaction really kicks forth. So we think we're satisfied, but it's artificial and it does not last. What Jesus gives will last.